So this is part 4 of the Team Losi 22-4 build series. Right now I'm getting through parts bag F, which is just building the shocks and mounting them on the chassis. So I'm almost done with building the shocks. I figured it would be good to make a video at this point, because from this point forward it's just, putting oil on the shocks, bleeding them out, mounting the springs, mounting the shocks. That's nothing special. That's no big deal. The shocks themselves went together pretty nicely. They're just like any other big bore shock, to be perfectly honest. But there were a few things that stood out. The shock shafts themselves appear to have some kind of coating, like a black oxide coating or something like that. So they're pretty smooth. And the shock seals are X-ring shock seals. Those supposedly perform better than standard O-ring seals. Let's see. What else was I going to mention? Oh, right. So when you're putting the actual end caps on, these guys here, make sure to pre-tap them with a 3mm tap. If you just try to screw them on and tap them as you're threading them on, it's not really going to work. It's extremely difficult to get that on without tapping it. So that's one thing to point out there. The rest of it goes together fine. The shock shafts themselves are very smooth as they move through the seal assembly. There is a little bit of play within the seal assembly, so that may have something to do with the shock shafts moving smoothly. It may also be related to whatever coating is on these shock shafts, but they do appear to be fairly smooth. The little bleeder cap here that you put the screw on with the little washer or O-ring is kind of interesting. Instead of giving you a small rubber O-ring like what you would get in the version 1 associated big bore shocks, or maybe like a little plastic piece, they give you these little what appear to be copper washers to put in there up against the screw against the shock cap. So that's kind of interesting, I guess. Other things to point out, much like the differential and the slipper clutch, there is no standard setting here for the preload setting. I found that kind of interesting, and also they don't tell you how to bleed the shocks. Now, of course, if you're building a kit like this, I think they expect you to know how to bleed shocks and get all the air out and basically build them properly. But I do find it interesting, if not disappointing, that they don't at least have something in here to give you a baseline setup for what the spacing should be for your preload. They give you some visual cue, but it's not an actual measurement. And also that basic instructions for people for whom this kit might be their first build, of how to actually put oil in the shocks and bleed the shocks correctly, and how to use that to adjust your rebound damping. So they don't mention that in here. That's not good. But again, the build itself is just fine. If you know what you're doing, it's not a problem at all. I think the reason why they don't tell you where to adjust a preload is because in the back there's a standard setting. Let's see if we go back a few pages here. There's a default setup, just like most kits would have, and they do give you a ride height, I believe. Yeah, ride height 22mm front and 22mm rear. And you adjust that with the preload. So depending on what kind of electronics you use, whether you use a shorty pack or a saddle pack, how heavy your speed control is, etc., that's going to change your ride height. So that's where you would adjust your preload to get the appropriate 22mm default ride height. It's kind of so-so. From this point forward, it's just, I'm just waiting for the oil for the air bubbles to get out of the shock. So that's why I'm making the video here. At that point, just put the springs on, mount the shocks. After that, we will have pretty much a fully assembled chassis, and then I get to mounting the electronics. So from this point, I will probably make a video after all of the electronics are mounted. That might be a little while, and after I mount some tires on the wheels. So this is kind of, yeah, it might be a few days at least before I get to do that. So this is kind of the final part of the main build, I would say. And it's okay. I'm reasonably satisfied with the build. Since I built plenty of kits, this build went fairly smoothly for me. There were a couple of hiccups along the way. Given that, and what I would expect in an instruction manual for builders of all skill levels, I am giving this build around a 7 out of 10. It's good, but it's not fantastic. The kit itself looks nice. I mean, it's pretty high quality. I do have concerns about the plastic steering rack. This may snap. I checked on A-Main, and they do make an aluminum steering rack, which is nice. That's like $30-something, which is not cheap at all. And I have the aluminum servo horn, so the only things that'll be plastic would be the steering knuckles and this plastic horn right here. So just bear in mind, any part you upgrade to aluminum is just going to transfer impact forces to the weaker parts of the chassis. So, you know, if I have an aluminum steering horn and a metal gear servo, and this steering rack is locked, there's no servo saver, then I'm going to break either this horn or the rack or the steering knuckle. Now, if you make everything aluminum, then you're just adding weight. So you have to bear that in mind as well. For the time being, I'm just going to keep everything plastic with the exception of the servo horn, and we'll see how it goes. A replacement plastic steering rack is only like $6. So you can go through 5 of those before you end up spending as much money as you would spend on the aluminum steering rack. So my recommendation, provisionally, is to stick with the plastic rack and don't drive like an idiot, and you'll be okay. Let's see. Yeah, and I also have concerns about the tightness of the belts. I expect for the first few runs at least, my motor and battery should get pretty hot. So just be very careful on your first few runs when you're breaking this in. You know, gear it down, maybe turn the endpoint down on your motor. You know, just make sure that you're not overstressing your electronics as you're breaking it in, because this drivetrain as it is pretty tight. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it. So overall, not too bad. I hope you like this build series. It's, you know, it's gone pretty well for me. I did forget to mention, by the way, that there is little to no bind in the suspension arms as you put them all together. This was a problem I had with the B5 when I initially built it, that the front arms especially had some bind against the inner hinge pins. You get none of that in this Losi build. It's all very nice and smooth, so that's very good. Thumbs up to them for getting that right. Let's see, anything else I want to mention? No, that's pretty much it. I'm just going to put this together and you know, put the electronics in later. I already have the body and wing painted, so those are ready to go. And in time, I'll make a video after, you know, all the electronics are installed. So thanks for watching.